keep finding ways that we're helping partners finding either, balance in their life or focus or purpose.
Practices that are going to help improve your project management skills or your finances.
We're here to talk about setting long-term goals and then how to achieve them.
Increasing your quality, therefore becoming the best place in town to work.
Welcome to Academy Live.
Welcome back to another episode of Academy Live. Today's PAX 8's very own Ashley Harris is here to talk about creating a culture of documentation. Getting everyone on the same page about documentation, pun intended, can be a very tricky business. So we started a course all about it. Creating a culture of documentation is a course designed for partners who do not have a system of documentation in place for their business, or the documentation they do have could be more formalized, consistent, secure, and centralized. As the world of technology continues to grow and advance, the amount of information needed for both the operations and security of business IT infrastructure and systems also grows exponentially. So it's impossible for IT professionals to retain and remember all this information in their heads alone. It needs to be documented somewhere so it's accessible and repeatable. With all that, it's time to welcome Ashley Harris. Ashley, welcome to Academy Live. Hello. Ashley, we're happy to have you too. Do you mind sharing a quick intro about yourself? Tell us a little bit, give us your humble brag.
Gotcha. Well, I'm going to try to make it super humble. So I am an executive coach with the PAX 8 Academy team, coaching partners on how to successfully run their operations. And I got to bring to that experience almost 20 years of IT experience, either in operations of an MSP, an IT provider, and also eventually a former MSP owner myself. So excited to be here and helping everybody figure things out.
Yes. And we all need that help. So we're glad that you're here. And next, we want to bring on your quote. So let's take a look at that if you don't mind reading it for us.
Yeah. All right. So mine is: the most difficult thing is the decision to act. The rest is merely tenacity. You can do anything you decide to do, and the fears are just paper tigers. You can act to change, to control your life and the procedure. But you have to be willing to let the process be the reward. So it's an Amelia Earhart quote. And the reason I chose this one is it kind of says it all in wordings, right? Sometimes the scariest thing is the first step. And often, though, once you get started, especially if you have a good plan, it's a little anticlimactic. So the idea is just do it. Gotta do it. If it's wrong, fix it. But don't just get stuck in nowhereville.
Yeah, when I read that, I was thinking about how the tyranny of the urgent, right? All those tickets that are rolling in all day long, how they're so easy to get, pulled into them. And
Right.
Then that plan that you had, you just never get started. So I love that. Stay focused, get started.
And I think too, that idea of, we're always so focused on the end, but that the process will be rewarding for you as well. And that, there is a lot that we can gain from really focusing on the process, focusing on, how we're getting there, not just that we got there or not. And I think that's true too when someone's developing their documentation process, whatever it might be.
Yeah, a little MacGyver effort there.
Exactly. Well, you brought some slides for us as a little sneak preview of the instructor-led course that you'll be teaching starting on May 7th. So coming up soon. And we want to kind of tell us a little bit about this course before we dive into it. Where did this idea come from? Tell us about that conversation that we had.
So I think, as we were sort of talking about, there's probably a million courses that we could do with partners. But something that I think always comes back to this idea is not just wanting to have a session where we regurgitate the same stuff that most of our partners know, right? So it's this idea of saying, let's get to the nitty gritty of how do we make this sustainable? How do we make this something that has a long-term ROI for our partners? And, while nobody really likes it, recently as our comparison, right? A little black licorice when it comes to the topic is a little taboo. But the idea is it's necessary to success because really it's the only way we can scale. It's the only way we can really have consistency and control of our product and services and client experience. That's what we do. So the idea of this course is to really help partners say, what is it that I need and how do I get started? But even more than that, that culture of documentation piece is this idea of how do we make sure that if we actually put the time in to do this, that it's something that we can make successful for the long term.
Excellent. Yeah, I think that really kind of hits at it because we were like, oh, it's just not going to be documentation 101, but how do you get the buy-in? How do you get everyone documenting all the time? And it's not just we do it once and then we don't think about documentation again. Great.
Exactly.
Well, let's pull up your slides to take a look at them.
Awesome. All right. Get a little drink there. Awesome. So again, this is a topic that is kind of extensive. It's kind of dry, a little boring. It's not everyone's favorite, but it's actually probably this underlying of saying, how do we have a good solid foundation of success? At a high level, I wanted to kind of make sure that we were clear on what we're talking about. From an MSP perspective or an IT provider, as many are, the idea is we need documentation, right? But what exactly are we talking about here? So in the case of this course, we're really wanting to dig into the idea that it's all things documentation, right? Everything about the documentation within your business is what we're talking about here. So we're not just talking about SOPs for configuring something. We're talking about everything that you need to know about your business and the documentation for that. And so little example here for reference, this would be everything from the legal entities of you forming your business to your MSA, to your SLA documents, employee information, HR, finance, and then of course, all of our service delivery elements all the way down to how we document our clients' organizations from internal documents all the way to client facing. So all of the things. And with that being said, if you can, next slide, is I kind of want to also touch a little bit on what do we mean by culture? What is it? What is this really? This term gets thrown around a lot. And I don't think everybody really kind of, has a good understanding of what exactly it is we're talking about. And so culture really is this shared concept, right? The shared values and beliefs in an org. It's the norms and the policies. This means, right, how do we do things? Why do we do things? And what is it we're trying to achieve, as well as our leadership style, how our leadership engages and supports our team. And then taking that further to say, this is the employee behavior. This is what's the work environment, how our team work together, treat each other, right? Have the ability to care about the success of the team as a whole. So culture for us is this idea of saying, how do we move forward as a team? How do we move through things as a team? And if we're doing that well, if everybody's on the same page and everybody's working towards the same mission and we have the same reasons and purpose, it's a lot easier for us to get buy-in from our team and participation in that over time. And which is when it comes to documentation, because it's a forever task that's never really done, right? There's no easy button and it's not a set it and forget it, right? It's an ongoing thing. And with that being said, the only way that we can have success long-term, ensuring that we follow all the processes and that we're doing it right and that we're maintaining that over time, is to be sure that the entire team is on board with what this looks like. So we're really wanting to dig into not just what it is that we need, but the who involved in making that happen, and then sustaining that over time. So next slide for me. So I think some of this is pretty obvious. I don't know that we're reinventing the wheel a little bit with this course, but one thing that really want to talk about is, why does it matter, right? Why is it so important that we do this and that we do it right? And so at a high level, some of the elements within your business where the documentation is going to make or break your ability to be successful and to grow and have top-notch service and have the clients you want and the business that you're looking for. So some clarity and consistency within the team. This is pretty huge. The idea of what it is that we do, how do we do it, and that's from our team's perspective, that this is the way we do things. This is how we do them. This is why we do them, and that matters again both for internal and external documentation, so that not only does our team know what we're doing, but our clients understand what we're doing, and that they receive that consistent experience or product and service that we're offering. So in addition, it provides significant accountability to our organizations, right? It gives us a measure of understanding whether or not we did something right, who was responsible for it, why did it happen? And so you really need that accountability to ourselves as an organization and to our clients. That clarity as well with that transparency of what are we doing, and it's clear and nobody is confused and nobody has that secret knowledge. So we're really wanting to have an understanding of what it is we do, why do we do it, what's expected of us, what's expected of our clients and our products and services. So in addition, one I think that's super important, and I think this is probably one that we all know to be true, but we all kind of hope in the back of our minds that we never have to deal with it, which is this idea of knowledge preservation and sharing. Often, I think we have one or two people in our organizations who have skills or knowledge of how something was done originally or how we did in the past. And that knowledge is in their head. It's not existing anywhere where it can be repeatable or anywhere where we can find it. So I like to think on the more positive side of things, what if that person in your organization, an employee in particular, wins the lottery, like a puff of dust kind of number, right? And then they're gone. And all that knowledge went with them, right? All that information, we have to try to recreate it or find it or start over from scratch. And it's just not a good place to be. So, protecting that within your organization, as well as the ability to then onboard new employees with that same consistent message, that same consistent way of doing things, which will allow us to onboard faster, but also ensure that our team has the capacity to work together, collaborate, and that our clients are in fact getting the same experience from anybody who shows up, whether they're new or they've been with the org for the entire time. So in addition, I think there's this idea of reduce risk and compliance. Some of it's mandatory, but some of it is just being clear, right? Reducing human error, having the ability to maintain and control things is going to reduce any risk within your organization. And I think the big ROI and super positive that our partners are going to get within your business, your products and services, they are your business. So the more efficiently and effective that you can deliver and maintain and control that quality is going to be huge on the ROI for your business and the long-term success. So with that, I'd like to, kind of a little segue here and maybe get the opinions of Rex and Bessie, which is just, we often have a lot of reasons why documentation doesn't happen. We get a lot of pushback. There's sometimes very legitimate excuses, but I don't think it's uncommon for us to hear that. Rex, especially, you kind of, started this whole wave, and a big portion of what we do is supply some templates to get started.
Yeah, Ashley, thanks for that. That was like an awesome overview of the topic. I got to tell you, probably the three hardest topics that we coach are, getting engineers to enter their time immediately as they do the work, um, new MSP client onboarding, and documentation. Right? They're just big topics. They take a lot to cover. A lot of detail, a lot of diving in, a lot of 5 phases. Understand the best practice, document, train, implement, and then inspect what you expect. And this one's a tough one. I will share kind of where I start when I'm coaching this is I like to pick the engineer on the team that does the best documentation naturally and sort of make them the champion, right? They're the one I want to include in these 5 phases. And we go through and work with them, again, get the best practice from anywhere you can get it. Pax8 Academy is a great place, but there's a lot of other places you can get best practice. I think Jonathan's going to come on a little bit later and talk about Lion Guard and how that helps automate the process. But you got to figure out your best practice and include that person in doing that, and then have them design that standard along with you to design what the standard's going to be, and then have that individual go pick their favorite client and document them to that best practice, just to kind of make sure that what you've designed and where you're going to store the information is going to work. Then you have that individual, because it's interesting within the engineering team, there's whoever the manager is, but there's a different person on the team. It's who they look to as the thought leader on that topic. And often, most of the time, it's another, the other engineer, right? So you want to get that person to do this training, and then you train the team, and then you ask each team member to bring their favorite customer to this new standard, and there's a lot of back and forth with that individual kind of checking the other engineers' work on their favorite customer, and there's some negotiation, and usually the process gets improved a little bit during that time. And then you get really tactical and make sure that there's a ticket for each one of your customers and each primary engineer to bring their customer up to this minimum documentation level. So
Yeah.
there's a bit of a process that goes on with all of this.
No easy button at all.
I really liked what you said, Rex, about how it's not overnight and it's not all at once. I really like the strategy that you suggested of starting with one and everyone bring their favorite customer after that. And this whole process, I think, makes it sound less scary, especially when you're looking at however many customers that you have, clients that you have, that you're like, oh, we really need to up our documentation on all of them. That can be overwhelming, but starting small and giving these suggestions to really get the buy-in, so it's not just one person's responsibility who's already good at it. They're getting everyone up to speed and bringing everyone into that how you get started, because I'm sure that's a really tough part of the process.
Yeah, and I remember thinking like, okay, this is, January and February are going to be documentation months, right? Like we're just going to refresh documentation across our entire client base. And then, then we'll get into backup checking and verification month or whatever. And that way you could keep it fresh, in your client base. But then I settled down on no, because then everybody gets really familiar with the standard processes, but then they don't use them for another 10 months, and then when we come back to it, we've sort of lost our acumen to deliver the process. And it was after that I decided, no, we're going to, as soon as we fully document a system, we're going to put in a recurring 12-month ticket, and the goal is basically to get 1/12 of our part of our client base getting documented and refreshed in January, and 1/12 being documented and refreshed in February. And we just leverage the PSA to do a recurring ticket for that set of clients every February for that refresh cycle. So,
And I think that's kind of part, of this macro goal that we're going to talk about with documentation again. I do have a slide if you'll pull it back up for me here, where I kind of want to show, this one. As part of this this course, we're not just talking about the what, right? The who, and then we're going to go a little bit into the how. But one of those things in the how is kind of down to this idea of if you're going to do this right, then you want to do it right. And in that case, we strongly are going to talk about what that foundation is going to be a good documentation management system that you can work with, something that works for your team, but that gives you a lot of the benefits that are going to come with this, right? We need the documentation, but we also need to have a way to optimize and enhance what we get out of that. And so a good documentation management system is going to give you massive increased productivity and efficiency overall, because it's going to do things like expand your ability to have access. This means that we're going to be able to have our team have accessibility securely in any format, anywhere that they are, whether they're remote, especially, this environment where we have this very heavily remote workforce. So expanding that accessibility is going to allow us to empower collaboration, real collaboration with the team, right? From an innovation perspective to just simply being able to work together and work off of each other and balance the team out. And so those things are in the macro is going to allow us to make better decisions and scale with the organization, all while reducing the risk of all of our information, right? We need security of access. We need to protect that knowledge. We need to protect the quality of our products and services. So we're going to be able to get all of that out of there. And part of that really stems from this idea that one of the number one things we run into with documentation is if it does exist, it exists in so many different places. We're not even sure where some of these things are. We know we made it at one point, but no one really knows where it lives, or it's super old. So having this centralized repository where everything exists and is connected is going to allow us to maintain control of that and really get the most out of it, automation, and protect all of that data, because it certainly allows us to have automation, create integrations with our tools that are really, really solid, allowing us to cut out some of the time it takes to navigate between things. And ultimately, some of what we're talking about here is that data existing in a lot of places develops these data silos, which often result in things like multiple versions of the same document. So duplicated work, not really knowing which one is actually, like if you find three, which one really is it if they're all very different? So the ability to not only control that, but for your team to have trust in the data that they're accessing, super huge. So, not only eliminating those silos, but giving you the ability to see version, history, audits, do searchability. A lot of that is going to be found in a very good documentation management system. So as part of the investment and the initiative to really bring good documentation practices to your organizations, this is going to be something that you're going to need to decide on, to look into and find. We're not going to push you in any particular direction. Our goal is to simply say, what is it that you need to get out of a good documentation management system, and then find the right one for you. And then, so one more slide for me. All of that coming back to our idea of documentation culture, right? So we have a good system and we develop this plan and we've got some buy-in for the team. How do we sustain this, nurture and maintain this culture, but then maintain this documentation that we put together, right? This is certainly not a project you can undertake lightly. And so it's certainly not a project that we would want to not have a very long, successful life within our orgs. So we're going to talk really about, and Rex kind of mentioned this a little bit in terms of 5 phases. How do you go about getting buy-in from the team and building the culture to begin with? But then how do we sustain that culture and make sure that everybody's on board and participating in that? So a couple of the things we're going to talk about or address within this course that are going to help our partners, I think, really overcome some of the barriers of starting, but also in really achieving success with documentation is to start with, we're going to need to take a stance that says documentation is required as part of your job here, right? This is a task and duty that is part of the role that you play within this org. It is not an extra, it's not optional, it's not an afterthought. It is actually a big portion of what you do here, and it's very, very important. So in order to maintain that, right, we need to let them know that it's required, that there are consequences if they don't do it, right? We need to have some inspection and enforcement that comes with that. But to do that, we need to train our team thoroughly. We need to make sure that they understand what it is we're asking of them, why we're asking them to do it, why it's important to the organization, and what are those objectives we're trying to achieve. Sometimes the knowing of those things help them understand why it's important for them to do it, or what happens when they don't do it, right? On the flip side of that, I think that we also need to make sure that we're talking about those outcomes and results when we do achieve our goals. So I think throwing a little like, what's in it for me here, right? What is it that I'm going to gain as part of my contribution or my participation in that? So really bringing that to light in what we're doing, and new employees and existing employees, and really reiterating that is going to be super important. In addition, it's going to be super important that we provide those, as Rex mentioned, right? What is the standard and how do we do it? Like, how do we document? What is the process or the policy of what we should be doing? And then providing templates and easy access is super important. Something that our team, I think, really believes in is this idea of leadership has to come to the table and think about how do we make documentation as easy as possible to do right and to do it on time, right? Like, it's not just about doing it. It's about making it easier, not making it more difficult or confusing. The simpler it is, the more we're going to have participation from the team. And the faster we'll be able to get it done. So these templates and some very specific process and procedures is going to be really helpful in basically helping someone get started, but also helping ensure that we get that done. Part of that is that you have to make time for documentation. You have to schedule it. Sure, Rex mentioned the idea of saying, hey, if we're going to roll this out as a project, we're going to schedule time to check into this. We're going to create tickets. But even on the day-to-day, when we're supporting our clients specifically from a MSP perspective, we need to make sure that when we're thinking about how much time to schedule to do the work of this ticket, to support this client and their request, that part of the time we're thinking about is documentation time. If we don't provide the time they need to do it, they're not going to do it, right? If we're not allowing time to do the work and the documentation, it's not going to get done. And it's not certainly going to get done later. So that's a huge one. And then as Rex mentioned, I think too, or kind of alluded to, is this idea of saying, how do we make it incentivized? What can we do to bring the team in? Your favorite client, maybe we have some gamification that happens, recognition for the efforts our team are putting in and the contributions, supporting the positive and the value of that effort will get more people to participate in it. But certainly I think while, I think there's probably mixed emotions about telling somebody good job for doing their job. But I think in this case, it's a tough element. There's a lot of work and time and effort that goes into it. It's not fun. It's not glamorous, right? It doesn't always fit the day. Sometimes it feels like extra work. It's inconvenient. The problem is we can't let those things be the drivers, right? We have to make the doing of those things more rewarding or positive than not doing them. So I think one of the big things that we're going to really touch on here.
I only have a couple minutes before we're going to bring Kaiser on, so I just want to get a couple thoughts out there. When we're doing these documentation projects, there's 4 different times where we tackle them. One is when we're onboarding a new client, right? They're going to go through a documentation project or so to get to some minimum standard of documentation. And then I already kind of mentioned the yearly refresh. But the third one is while we're actively working this client throughout the year, we need to be conscious that if we're making any changes, documentation may need to be refreshed. And that's a tough one to keep up with. But in all 3 of those, who is paying the bill to do this documentation work? It's the MSP, right? You're paying the bill because you're delivering this value as part of your flat fee. But I wanted to point out that when most partners don't include scope project work in their flat fee agreements, and when you're scoping that project, make sure you add the time to refresh the documentation on everything that you're upgrading, because that's a way to transfer the cost of doing this documentation work on an ongoing basis over to your client to pay for that documentation work as part of the project work that's changing the system. And then one important piece is there's usually some kind of an implementation engineer doing this work that needs to update the documentation. But before we close the project, we need to have the help desk sign off that documentation actually works. So just want to get those 2 thoughts out there before we.
No, I absolutely. And that's one of the things that why we talk about this idea of saying it's part of the job description. It's part of the duties that are your job. So not just supporting the client, but documenting what you do. That's your time, that's your notes for that. And, maybe it's a one-off. Maybe you didn't change anything major. So the documentation is just the notes of the ticket. But either way, the idea is we have to make sure that we're factoring that in the scheduling of that over the ongoing. But definitely if we do that well, I think it does exactly what you're talking about, Rex, too. Even if we're just talking about how we think about the time it takes to support a client, we really want to make sure that we're including time to document as needed for the clients, not just, the time it takes to support a user or an install application.
Definitely. And this is such a good discussion. We need to take a quick pause. We're going to jump to our sales pitch, and then we'll be back with Ashley for more discussion around documentation. So stay tuned.
Play ball. I got to experience a great experience in my baseball life. I started playing when I was about 6 years old, and I got to play well into my 40s. Then I got to become a coach, which was a lot of fun. I coached my son's travel team through his time in high school. I went from being a player to being a coach. When I was running my IT services company, as I scaled, I got to the point where I began to hire salespeople. So again, I shifted from principal or owner-led sales into a sales manager role. Many challenges come with this. For one, owners and executives of companies know more about their business than the average sales rep will. Next, the executive feels that the salesperson now has 40 hours of a week to be able to focus on sales and should be able to do more. So they look at tracking their activities. Sales is a skill. It's a cognitive profession. It requires knowledge, understanding, thought, and experience. It is not a cadence or an activity. So if you're a sales leader and cannot tell if reps are making progress, is that the rep's fault or is it the leader's fault? How can you tell if the salesperson is working? There's nothing in the pipeline. There's no first-time appointments with prospects. That's a pretty good indicator. Their job is revenue generation. That's the leading indicator and metric that you should be tracking. They should be trained to develop revenue. Sales is, again, a skill, not an activity, right? Is being an engineer a skill or an activity? So let's touch all the bases on how to improve as a sales leader. 1, establish KPIs around first-time appointments. Set them up where networking events, where your target client profile goes. Ask them to cultivate a top 200 of prospects in your target industry and establish quotas or sales targets when they are hired. If they're already onboarded, set these up as soon as possible. 2, weekly one-on-one meetings with your salesperson. Get to know them as a person. Ask them how their week was. How can you help them out? How many first-time appointments did they have last week? How many do they have scheduled this week? Who did they talk to? What did they talk about? Review the pipeline and ask them how you can help them be more successful. 3, weekly meetings with the sales team, mostly focused on learning and training. 4, go out with them on appointments. Be there for them. Do a deep dive after the call and say, hey, what did we do well? What could we improve upon? Your job is to be a leader and a guide to them. Invest your time in them and they will be successful.
Play ball!
Well, thank you so much, Keith, for a great sales pitch. We're always learning so much from you and learning about sales quota, so many different things to keep in mind. One thing that Keith didn't talk about too much was around documentation for the sales department. Ashley, can you talk a little bit about that? I think we always think, oh, documentation related to service, but every area of the MSP probably needs documentation. Can you share a little bit, like what should the sales team in an MSP think about?
Yeah, definitely. Well, and as I said at the beginning, right, the idea is for this course is to make sure that we're talking about all the forms of documentation. It's more than just service, right? That's kind of just a portion of it. So from sales, I think this is where understanding what your brand message is. What is our product? What is it that we do? What is it that we offer? So definitely documentation around mission, vision, values, and what is our branding language. And that should be consistent through all of your marketing and sales efforts. You want to make sure everybody's saying the same thing and that it's clear. So having documentation about that, but also both from a training perspective internally, understanding what is the process of selling, right? If we meet a prospect and we have an opportunity that comes, what does that process look like? The sales process, who's involved, who do they need to reach out to, where do we get our information in terms of pricing, how do we get a quote, how do we, if we win a deal, how do we kick that off, how do we make sure that we get that right handoff, and so that we're all on the same page, especially when we do that handoff between sales or projects and service. It's super important, like Rex said, getting some sign off there, so that we are making sure that as we carry them through, nothing has changed and the expectation of messaging is the same. But in addition to that, I think, I think Keith touched a little bit on this idea of like KPIs and what are the outcomes and the expectations of where we are. So documenting of where do we get those, what are they, what are the expectations, and what happens if something isn't hitting expectation or isn't the outcome? What do we do? How do we fix it? What's next?
Excellent. Yeah, thank you so much.
I love this topic so much. What I love the most, and it's really kind of a droll topic. Who gets excited about documentation? Come on, that's a ridiculous thing to say. But I think what I love the most about this topic and conversation is the culture of documentation. It's not just hey, let's go out there and do this one time. Let's go create this documentation. It's a constant effort. You talked about, you're constantly updating and changing and it's everyone too. It's not just, Rex's idea. I love the idea of having a champion lead the efforts, but if it doesn't go from that champion to the rest of the organization, it just kind of falls flat. I'm going to share something and then I have a question for you. I remember one of my favorite things in business was having particular engineers reluctant to document or kind of complaining about, having to do that. And I remember very specifically opportunities where they got involved in a situation where there was inadequate documentation and they struggled. And then they came back and saw firsthand, it's like, oh, okay, I'm on board now. And it was really powerful, but they had to experience that. So my question for you is, can you give a couple examples of success stories, or where companies that have gone through building a culture of documentation have seen success, and maybe some ideas of experiences that'll help maybe people that are listening think of how to lean into uh, building on those experiences.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think, I mean, there are probably some, business stories, big enterprises where you've heard of good culture and what does that do for them. But I think when it comes down to documentation, is exactly kind of what you mentioned. This idea of a couple things that I think very relevant in just the market and the economy and the world today, right? We talk about this quiet quitting and people leaving jobs to go to this other, you know, better opportunities. But a lot of that is this idea of it's not just leaving a job. It's the idea of saying, I feel like this is frustrating because I don't know what I'm doing, or I'm always struggling in the organization to get things done. So this idea of proper training and getting everybody on board, but really supporting and valuing that consistent work environment, which breeds, to my opinion, good customer experience, right? Like if our employees are happy, our customers are usually happy. So I think some of the success that happens here is that we're going to be able to increase productivity and efficiency right away, right? If we're getting some of these things streamlined, that is going to be noticeable and felt within the org. And I love your example of somebody who's experienced it, right? Sometimes some of us like to learn by doing instead of by the example of others. But I think that's when we talk about culture, this idea of saying, some of the what's in it for me is the idea that everybody can be successful if we do this. If everybody's doing a little bit of their part, that's going to have a ripple effect within the organization. And that's going to help us focus on things like improving and innovating and getting our ideas out there and growth within maybe our careers, our employees, and our team. But also, I think at scale in terms of being able to grow our business and having good client satisfaction. That would be the other area I think that partners who really embrace this idea of standards and process and really putting things together and sticking with that approach, right? Really digging in, are seeing that they're having much more success with their clients. And the more we can build trust with our clients, the easier it is for us to maintain those relationships over time, right? New clients is great. We need growth, but hanging on to clients is always less expensive. So if we can improve that experience overall, I think it means that we can enjoy the reward of what we do and what we enjoy in our careers, but have to do less work to get it, right? That efficiency that comes is super huge, I think. And while it takes a little time, there's no direct path, right? That's right. There's no easy button, but doing it, the ROI is positive. I've never seen it be negative. I can't think unless you're just going to do it and not do it right. That's kind of the approach, right? We don't want you to just put the time and effort in, but there really is no downside to doing it and doing it right. You just got to do it.
Now, if there's anyone listening, Ashley, who's thinking about taking the course, can you give us kind of a high-level overview of what topics will be covered? I know we kind of got into the overview today, but I know there's some templates you're going to be giving as part of the course and some other resources to help partners get started. Do you mind sharing a little bit what that will be?
Yeah, so obviously, here it's a little less time. This course is 5 one-hour sessions plus a Q&A. And to wrap things up nicely at the end. But during that time, we're going to really dig into what is it that we need? What are we talking about from a standpoint of just some clarity? We're going to talk a little bit about how do you get started? That's going to be a big one. And one of those in this process together is going to be, where are we now? a little self assessment and figuring out what that is, and this idea of being able to put together a plan or a project to move forward. So we're going to talk through what some of the pieces are to get there. But in addition to that, we are going to talk about things like what makes good documentation? What are we looking for? What should you have, including maybe some reference to some international standards and for quality documentation and some compliance regulatory requirements that need to be satisfied. So some awareness there. But then we're also going to talk about beyond just knowing where to put it, what's a good structure for the folders, right? You've got to put this all together, but we need to have some clarity in what's the path so that not just kind of an idea of where things are, but some real clarity on if I'm looking for this thing, I know where to go, right? So talking about how do we structure our folders, how do we link things together in a way that's meaningful. But then we're also going to be able to really touch on things like some templates. The how-to is important. How do we make documentation? What goes into it? But I am going to provide some ready-made templates to get you started if you don't know where to start, if you don't have anything. So we're going to supply that as well. And there's a little bit of a resource guide that they can come back to at the end. It kind of talks them through this, a little one-stop shop for all the tidbits we're going to cover in the course. But then a big portion of that's going to be, right, there's some foundational pieces, but then we're definitely going to dig into the structure of the culture, right? How do we start it? How do we build it up? What does it take to get there? Rex mentioned this a little bit earlier in our sort of 5-phase approach, right? How do we go about doing this in a way we know is successful? And then beyond that, we're going to talk about how do we sustain that over time.
This is,
Thank you.
I think this is so valuable because I think it's very practical, right? I mean, you mentioned it. I think a lot of our partners don't know where to start. Like you said, that there's not an easy button. Darn it, and I think that's what you kind of look for is what's the easy button. I think the next best thing is what's a path. And I love the templates and the standards. And we talk a lot about an SOP for your SOPs, right?
Yes.
Having
how to.
Yeah, and I think that's great. And I know you talk about, having a standard operating procedure for how you build and develop your standard operating procedures. And that's critical. I think, that consistency. And I think that's a hard first step. But when people get through that, I think it really builds pretty easily. Question I have for you is in part of this process. Again, it's not a one-time do it and here you go and you're done. But can you talk a little bit about processes or change management or building in those things to check or validate or updating or there's a new version of this needs a new thing.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit about just updating documentation and I guess change management?
Yeah. So and that will be I think part of this idea of maintaining, right, this over time is we are going to talk about some recommendations or options that we've seen be successful, right? There's not always just one way, but we want to give you some options of this or this are things you should be doing. So definitely approach to who is responsible for the documents, depending on what they are. Not one single person will be responsible for everything. So we really need a team effort to have accountability and ownership of some of these documents. And so defining who that is, and who maybe some other people are that are, accountable to this or sort of responsible that we can go to if that person's unavailable. But then really talking about how things get changed, how often we update the team, what level of change warrants just a revision, and what level it warrants a conversation or a plan around how do we go back to the team and train on something that's different, and make sure that everybody knows where that is. So again, that change management or some sort of change log where we can see who was the last person updated, when did they do it, and kind of a quick summary of what it was that they changed. And then in addition to that, as part of the initial sort of implementation of that, we need to set some standards of which documents need to be updated at which frequency, right? So I think Rex brought up some things like once a year. There may be some things that need to be updated more frequently than that. And there might be some where we're just simply doing a review to make sure nothing's changed majorly. But there's probably some sort of cadence between maybe once a quarter, twice a year, or yearly, depending on what the documentation is. So defining that when we create it as this path of what is it, who's it for, who's the person that's sort of the owner of this, but also at which cadence are we actually purposefully reviewing and refreshing as opposed to updating as we go. So I think we're going to talk a little bit about all of those things and making sure they're happening as part of the whole.
Ashley, we're getting close to the end of our time together, but we have a quick question from the audience. So let's pull that up. Oh, how do we sign up for the course? Okay, I'll take this one if that's okay, Ashley. So you can sign up for this course. There's a link in our chat, right below, not our chat, but in this description of the YouTube channel. So you can just sign up right there. You can also find this course by just going into the marketplace, app.pax8.com, and just searching creating culture of documentation. It'll come right up. Or you can go to our website, pax8.com/academy, click on instructor-led courses, and you'll see the course there. You can sign up that way as well. This course is available as a standalone, so you can purchase it just this course, or you can have it as part of your subscription. So you get this course and our 27 others that we have that you can sign up for and have your whole team train. So I just want to say thank you so much, Ashley, for joining us and for giving us all this insight. I hope everyone is excited now about documentation and not as nervous or finding it too boring. So really appreciate you coming in. We'll have to say goodbye. We're going to welcome on Jonathan Cox. Jonathan, welcome.
Yeah, great.
Do you mind just sharing?
Great to be back.
Yeah, exactly. You're back again. But if anyone didn't hear, can you just give a quick introduction of yourself and get straight to the point? What do we need to know about the documentation tools that are available in the marketplace? And what do our partners need to know about that?
Sure thing. So I'm Jonathan Cox. I run our operations solutions consultant team, which really it's a team of individuals who are concerned with how do we make our partners more efficient? How do we help our partners grow their business? And how do we help them to mitigate and manage risk? So we do have a lot of tools in the marketplace to help with this. But the first thing I wanted to say here is that, from a tooling standpoint, that comes second to everything that Rex is talking about, to everything that Ashley's talking about, which is, the 5 phases of operational excellence. And I think that's an important thing to call out because I think Chris said it best. They're surprised there is no easy button. There's not a piece of software we can just buy and push a button and have all this done for us. The software supports the initiatives. So I just wanted to say that out front. We've had hundreds of conversations with our partners about this very thing. We run these sort of hour-long consults where we look at basic blocking and tackling stuff. And documentation and change management is something we always talk about because it's typically a big pain point and it's typically really boring and stuff that techs don't want to do, stuff that really nobody wants to do. I think that was brought up earlier as well. There's tools out there. There's IT Glue, there's IT Boost, there's Hoodoo. You might have stuff in SharePoint and Teams channels, and there's all this disparate, information everywhere, and that can lead to, real consequences for service delivery, for the customer experience, for the employee experience, and I think that was all called out as well. It really starts with the why. Having that internal champion huge and implementing something like this, the why for me as a technician, all that comes into play. So, there are tools that make this a little bit easier. If you have like an IT Boost, IT Glue, a Hoodoo out there, those are great tools for housing this documentation, creating standard operating procedures, having everything in one place. So if somebody's out sick, they can look in and see, hey, what do I need to do for this client from a service delivery standpoint? But there's other tools out there that really help to augment those. One in particular that I think Rex called out a little earlier is LionGuard. So LionGuard's one that I would recommend taking a look at because it does automated documentation of configuration state data across your SaaS stack. Where it feeds that into IT Glue or like a Hoodoo on a daily basis. And one of the things is when you talk about getting that adoption by your team and getting that buy-in and that why, when you go into your documentation tool and you don't have that updated documentation and, oh, I went there, but it was incorrect, it was inaccurate, it was not up to date. Well, how many times am I going to go in there, see that that's the case, and then just not trust the process and not trust the tool? So a lot of that's really important when it comes to, getting that full adoption and that continued adoption to make sure that we do have that updated and accurate information in there. So those are some of the big things that we really talk about and that we really see. The other thing here is Ashley talked a lot about risk mitigation, compliance, efficiency and effectiveness, tribal knowledge, and a lot of that really relates to that the book that's out there called The E-Myth, and really building something like a franchise, I think is really important. And that's where, the importance of documentation really comes in. So creating that culture, definitely important, implementing tools around it that will help support their own why and their own buy-in, and then rewarding that. Rex had a guest on a couple of months ago, Steven Spiegel of COOs, that really helps with employee recognition. And that's one that I would highly recommend looking at as well as you're building that culture of compliance around documentation. So just some thoughts on some tools there, but do want to reiterate that culture, that process around it, and that buy-in and those 5 phases of operational excellence are first and foremost.
It's the backbone. So if there is, though, Jonathan, a partner listening, they're like, ooh, their ears perked up at CrewWho or Lion Guard, what should they do? Who should they talk to learn more?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of ways to get there. Definitely, you can go into the Pax8 marketplace and take a look, at CrewWho, take a look at Lion Guard, pull up those tools. You can also reach out to your channel account manager or your operations solutions consultant. Or, if you don't have access to any of that, can't find it, feel free to message me on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to connect you with the right folks there. But we're probably going to ask you first, have you looked at how you would implement a tool like that? Because again, there's no easy button.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Jonathan, for joining us on the show. And we're going to say goodbye and head to final thoughts.
Wow, I think this was a great show today. We've been coaching minimum documentation for somewhere around the 13 years, and we've got so many topics we want to bring to on-demand and instructor-led courses and integrate into the peer groups. And I'm just so excited that Ashley put the work in to bring this to an instructor-led course. So great work on that. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Minimum documentation is probably one of the top 3 hardest ones to tackle because it's such a broad topic and getting everybody on board. But if you, like Jonathan said, if you read the E-Myth, spend your time working on the business and not in the business, and you'll get the most important things done. Chris, what do you think?
Yeah, I did great, because I'd like to remind people, this isn't an overnight thing. Documentation and a culture of it is kind of a long haul. And I think I would just encourage people to kind of keep that in the perspective that this is, a longer goal to master. It's not something you're going to fix once or you're going to fix right away. But persistence here is, I think, what really pays off. Making version 1 better, 1.1, 1.2, and then building that in where you get the adoption and it grows and becomes a part of what you do day to day. Just takes time and that tenacity. And I think it pays off. It's definitely worth it. So that would be my final thought is, long haul, keep at it, work it. There's a benefit. Bessie?
I know a lot of the things we said today sound easier than they're actually going to be to implement, but we have a lot of tools available for you as you go through that process. I really loved what Ashley said about keeping it simple, make it as easy as possible to do. So it's part of their job, part of everyone's job. Everyone's working towards the same goals. And definitely sign up for the instructor-led course. Starts May 7th. We would love to see you there. I just want to say thank you, everyone, so much for watching. Be sure to check us out next week. Rex will be solo talking all about the operational journey. I know Ash has another course on that as well, but Rex will be the one talking through it on next week, Tuesday. You don't want to miss it. Remember, we're live every Tuesday at 2 p.m. Mountain and on demand always. Don't forget to subscribe and like our YouTube channel. Rex, want to close us out?
Yeah, please spend tonight thinking about what you're going to do differently tomorrow. Thanks, everyone.